Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about the natal astrological chart of Richard Ramirez, who many of you may know. He gained notoriety as being called the Night Stalker. He had a number of other aliases, but anyway, he was a serial killer, and he also was a rapist and a burglar. And anyway, the thing I wanted to talk about first is breaking down his, the basic proponents, the three, what I consider three main proponents in an astrological chart: Sun, Moon, and Ascendant. His Sun and his Moon are both in Pisces, Ascendant being in Sagittarius. Now, a lot of this Sun Moon energy, I believe, was attaining some kind of dreams or some kind of fantasies. In this case, they were, I would say, at least somewhat warped in this particular example with him. And having a Sagittarius rising, he did so, I mean, with sadly, a lot of exuberance, with a lot of enthusiasm, expansive energy. He probably felt like he was never going to get caught. I mean, he also had Jupiter in Sagittarius in his first house, Jupiter at 29 degrees, which I see as the full culmination of that energy. And I mean, it was in its dignity in Sagittarius, but the fact, I mean, just Jupiter at 29 degrees can give a distorted amount of enthusiasm and expansive energy, especially being in Sagittarius and in his adventurous escapades. But he might have seen as his adventurous escapades, he probably felt that he was not going to get apprehended ever, which of course he eventually did. But anyway, a lot of this, to me, I mean, I look at his chart. I mean, it's no surprise he has this strong Pisces energy, and Mercury being in Pisces, of course, in its detriment and its fall. It's modified to some degree by being in the third house of accidental dignity. But with him, I mean, he was, I felt like, and I don't know if he was ever classified as this or not, but I mean, I think he was likely psychotic or at least a psychopath. But again, I'm not sure. I haven't studied up enough on him to know whether he was actually classified that as far as his mental health. I do realize, though, there was speculation that he may have had schizophrenia. Now, I don't think he was ever officially diagnosed with that, but having all that Pisces energy really doesn't surprise me. And having at least one, it's having some, at least one adverse aspect to the Pisces energies. And I believe likely, I mean, it was more than that. He had the Jupiter square his Mercury in Pisces, and he also had the Sun in Pisces was opposing Pluto. So I know there was at least two major adverse aspects involving that Pisces energy. Also having the Moon in Pisces at 29 degrees, which I see is the full culmination of that energy. And really what it tells me, he probably likely had a lot of a very powerful, really strong, chaotic, tumultuous, emotional energy. And the thing is, in having it conjunct his Mercury likely affected his rational thinking more so than the average person. The Moon was also the ruler of his 8th house of murder and death. So the thing about it is, looking as far as Richard Ramirez's chart. Now, he had most of his planets were below the horizon, which tells me, I mean, he's likely was very actually more introverted and introspective, more subjective than objective, and more, I would say, more pessimistic than optimistic. What I found in his chart too is being what really is striking. There is one aspect, well, at least one of the ones that stood out to me, was the fact he had the Sun making the opposition to Pluto. Now, these people, I mean, people that have the Sun in a major adverse aspect to the natal Pluto, I see this as sometimes where that power is away from them. Like they feel they can't quench enough power. Basically, they can't seem to get what they really want. This could be a person, and the fact that he murdered a number of people, it was maybe this played a role in him being so relentless, not just being so relentless with the murdering, but the fact that he couldn't really just do enough. He would kill one person and it did not satisfy him. And I think when you also, well, when you have the Sun making the opposition to Pluto. It can also be a person that may concurrently want to shine, basically to get some notoriety, exposure, but also to be concealed at the same time. And the thing about it is, the sun being in Pisces, it's like he shined in being unseen, in being stealth, like in being that person that could be very elusive and evasive, that was able to basically escape capture for a fairly protracted period until he was eventually apprehended and caught. Now he has Mars conjunct Venus in Aquarius in the second house of values, so I think this may have manifested with him in terms of maybe some that enjoyment of sexually deviant behavior, bizarre sexual behavior, which he valued. He also has Uranus in Leo in the 8th house, if I'm not mistaken, at 18 degrees. 18 degrees in astrology is referred to as a degree of the devil, but a lot of what I believe how this manifests a lot is just very like malevolent, nefarious energy, and really having Uranus in the 8th house in some cases, and if the person is a murderer in isolated cases, which he was, that could give an unusual need for that murder, perhaps for notoriety, being in Leo, for killing others, sadly. And I think that's how it may have manifested in his case, sadly. Now, the thing about Richard Ramirez too is I believe he had the ascendant at 22 degrees, which 22 degrees is like seen as that dreaded degree, but more significant, I believe, in the fixed signs, because in the fixed signs that's considered a real critical, it's a critical degree in astrology for people that have the 22nd degree in fixed signs. But 22nd degree does seem to be, have some negative, connotation with it, perhaps I believe for the other signs as well. And being in Sagittarius, maybe this might have manifested and panned out in Richard Ramirez, is just maybe really facing just the adverse situations in life through having a very warped philosophy, or just being, overly, maybe through what he would be projecting outwardly as far as over optimism, perhaps an over exuberance, over enthusiastic, those qualities, and even some negative Sagittarius qualities he was expressing outwardly, because the ascendant, of course, the outer demeanor. So this could have been a very adverse placement for him as far as that expression of the negative Sagittarius rising qualities, of course, being expressed outwardly, such as being overly foolhardy and reckless. It could be very, it does seem like the 22nd degree can be ill-fated, and Sagittarius, of course, is associated with the law, so you could basically do the math. He was eventually apprehended. I'm going to get to that momentarily. Now, as far as looking at Richard Ramirez's, really, you look at that energy again, that Pisces energy really stands out. To me, very significantly. And the thing about him is, you look at as far as his apprehension went, when he got apprehended on that day, August 30th, 1985. What was interesting was that when at the time, shortly before he was apprehended, there was apparently some discovery that was made. Somebody had noticed him. He was oblivious to this. I think a lot of it is that Pisces Sagittarius kind of naive energy. He had been all on the news as one of the top stories, and at least as far as a picture went, they didn't identify him, I don't think, by name, but he had been seen in some newspaper, and somebody had pointed out that they recognized him. And when he heard that, they were like, "Oh, that's the guy," or whatever. That's the guy who's been killing. I don't know what words it said to him, but it was something to the effect that he had been recognized by at least one bystander at the time, and Richard Ramirez took off running. And at this time, very odd, interesting transit. At the time, he had the transit Mercury in Leo was conjunct his natal Uranus and Leo in the 8th house. And when you have a transit when transit Mercury hits your natal Uranus, a lot of times this could be some kind of very unpredictable, unusual, unanticipated communication or news that may hit you. And he was in the newspaper, I believe, at the time, and in Leo, where you have all this notoriety and exposure, and in the 8th house being a suspect for the murder. So, I mean, the 8th house is associated, of course, with death and murder. And at this time, at some point, he was apprehended by a number of people, and the cops eventually did catch up with him and bring him in to jail. Now, at the time as well, Richard Ramirez had the transit south node in Scorpio was closing in on, I believe, not mistaken, it was his natal Neptune. Now, the natal Neptune in Scorpio in the 11th house could have manifested with him, sadly, as maybe trying to attain some fantasy or some dream connected with death and murder, and doing something with very nefarious energy, and being in the 11th house as a goal or aspiration. When you have the south node being involved in a transit, that could be an indicator of something that is going away. So for him, and luckily for many people, that fantasy, perhaps of being that murderer, was something and tied into a goal and aspiration, was going to be leaving at that time. Now, he also, in his natal chart, Richard Ramirez had the south node in Pisces right by his Mercury. And when you're talking about the south node involved in a conjunction in a natal chart, that could be indicative of energy you need to be going away from. And he was not obviously going away from it. Didn't seem like any time soon. When he was, and really, when you're talking about Mercury and Pisces, that could be very delusional thinking, deceptive thinking. Thinking about a lot of communication connected with prevarication, and really maybe and when you have that south node in it, it could be going away from thinking connected with maybe some warped dreams or unrealistic thinking, and that was something that he was not obviously going away from, sadly, anytime soon. It was an indicator that he needed to go away from that, and more so than other people. I mean, people that have Mercury and Pisces natally may have a lot of their thinking connected with dreams and fantasizing, and may be unrealistic at times, but could be idealistic. When you have the south node by one's Mercury, it's more about going away from the negative energy connected with it. If somebody has if they have the Mercury and Pisces in their chart, even though it's in its fall and detriment, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be going away from it if they're manifesting the positive energy connected with it. That's basically what I'm saying. But when you have the south node by it, a lot of times it could mean you need to be going away from that energy. And the thing about this as well, with Richard Ramirez, is that another thing that was striking too. I noticed that on the day that he died, he had some kind of it was something with hepatitis. That was something. So he was suffering from something with hepatitis at the time he died, and that could be something very damaging as far as the liver goes. Now, in his natal chart, again, he has Sagittarius ascendant. The ascendant, of course, is is connected with the physical body. Sagittarius, of course, could be connected with the liver. He had an issue with the liver. The chart ruler, which is Jupiter as well, Jupiter can be connected with the liver. He had that at 29 degrees, the full culmination of the sign. So I think that could be an indicator of some issues with the liver as well. At the time he died, he also had transit Jupiter in Gemini, perhaps making a long opposition to his ascendant at the time. Transit Black Moon Lilith was in Gemini at 29 degrees, and that could have given, it was, since it was fairly close to the Jupiter, maybe that gave, it could have added a little bit more suffering in connection with that. He also had in his chart what I would consider, it would be a T-square. It wasn't completely mutable. It involved mutable energy. Two of the three proponents in the T-square involve mutable energy. The moon in Pisces at 29 degrees, Jupiter in Sagittarius 29 degrees, and of course in the first house of the physical body, and also the midheaven. I'm counting that in part of the configuration. Midheaven was like around 8 degrees Libra, so you can argue that this was at least a long T-square, but it had one cardinal proponent and two mutable. At the time, the opposition, an opposition was made in transit to that focal point, the apex or focal point of the configuration, which was Jupiter in Sagittarius. It was opposed by transiting Black Moon Lilith in Gemini at 29 degrees. And the reason I think that could have been significant is because a lot of times if you have a transit, when it makes the opposition to the focal point of a T-square configuration, often significant events can transpire in one's life. And Black Moon Lilith energy can be about tribulation and suffering. And the fact that it was in Gemini, I think it's almost symbolic. And being at 29 degrees, it's like it almost symbolized to me that it was the end of somebody, with maybe that had some very strong, mental issues, cerebral issues, that really, which manifested in very nefarious energy, and that was going to be the end of that. I mean, as far as interesting that he died at this time, I mean, maybe on as far as a global level, it comes, I mean, it could maybe represented that this, somebody that evil was going to die or pass at this time. But the fact it made the opposition to his focal point is even more significant, I think, as well. And the focal point, of course, being Jupiter in the Sagittarius in the first house of the physical body. And when he died, he was having some issues with his liver. So I thought that was very interesting the way that panned out. Anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.